Why did the laughter stop so suddenly? She felt it before she heard it, the shift in the air, the way judgment turned into something colder. She stood in the aisle with her duffel bag pressed against her leg, shoulders squared not from pride, but habit. 15 years of learning how to exist without being noticed had taught her that attention was never accidental. It always meant something was about to go wrong. Athalia Desjardins hadn't planned to be seen that day. She boarded the aircraft the way she moved through most places, efficiently, quietly, eyes forward. First class. Seat 1C. The boarding pass in her hand was worn at the edges, folded and unfolded too many times while her mind replayed the message from her brother. Days, not weeks. The words kept time with her pulse. She didn't look like anyone people expected to sit there. No tailored suit, no polished shoes, just jeans that had been repaired more than replaced, a leather jacket softened by years of wear, hair pulled tight, practical, eyes that never rested. The businessman across the aisle noticed immediately. So did the women behind her. Their glances weren't curious. They were evaluative, measuring. She felt it all, she always did. But she didn't react. She slid into her seat, adjusted her bag, buckled in, as if belonging was something you never explained, only endured. The delay came quickly. Weather, always weather. 40 minutes stretched into something heavier. Restlessness turned to irritation, and irritation, when mixed with entitlement, needed a target. That target became her. It started softly, comments about standards, about appearances, about people who didn't belong. Athalia kept her eyes on the window, on the gray clouds gathering beyond the glass. She had been inside storms far worse than this. She had learned long ago that most hostility burned itself out if you refused to feed it. Then the flight attendant came. Her voice was polite, too polite, the kind of tone that carried rehearsed regret. There was a mistake, she said, a booking issue. They needed to move her to economy. Athalia checked her boarding pass anyway, not because she doubted herself, because discipline demanded confirmation. Seat 1C. Still she nodded. Arguing took energy, energy she didn't have to spare. She stood. As she did, someone muttered something sharp enough to draw blood. Someone else laughed. A phone camera lifted, captured the moment. The walk down the aisle felt longer than any exfil she'd ever done under fire. Public humiliation had a different weight. In economy, the aisle was crowded. No seat, no space, just eyes, curious, annoyed, dismissive. She shifted her bag just slightly and felt the jacket ride up across her back. She didn't notice the tattoo show. But others did. A trident, black ink, precise, worn into skin that had learned pain intimately. Someone inhaled sharply, someone else went quiet. And somewhere near the cockpit, a pilot froze mid-step. Captain Eldon Vantage had seen that symbol before. Not on television, not in books, in briefings, in places without names, attached to reports that never left locked rooms. The markings weren't decorative, they were earned, specific, rare. And they belonged to someone who wasn't supposed to be visible. He stared. Then he did something no one expected. He saluted. The silence spread faster than sound. Athalia turned slowly. Her eyes met his. Soldier to soldier, no surprise, just recognition, the kind that carried history without explanation. "Ma'am," he said, steady now, "you're returning to your seat." She didn't speak, she didn't need to. As they walked forward, whispers followed. Confusion turned into understanding. Judgment folded into shame. The man who had laughed couldn't meet her eyes. The phone lowered. She sat back in 1C. The captain spoke, not loudly, not theatrically, just enough. He told them who she was, not everything. Never everything. Just enough to remind them that valor didn't announce itself. That service didn't dress for comfort. That some people carried the weight so others never had to notice. When he returned to the cockpit, Athalia stared straight ahead. Visibility felt heavier than invisibility ever had. The flight took off, and with it the moment passed, but the reckoning did not. As the engines settled into their rhythm, exhaustion finally reached her bones. Not physical, something deeper. The kind that came from holding yourself together for years without ever loosening your grip. Her phone buzzed. "He's waiting for you." She closed her eyes. She had survived ambushes, coordinated rescues, made decisions that ended lives to save others. None of it had prepared her for the fear of arriving too late. When they landed, something unexpected happened. No one rushed the aisle. They waited. For her. It embarrassed her, moved her, confused her. Respect always did. At the hospital, the air smelled like endings. Her brother's arms tightened around her as if she might disappear again if he let go. Her father looked smaller than she remembered. Fragile, still formidable. "You made it," he whispered. She took his hand, the same hand that had taught her to stand straight, to speak little, to serve fully. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Before dawn, he was gone. She held herself together until the room was quiet, until the machine stopped, until there was nothing left to manage. Later, she found the letter. The best served quietly, he'd written, but sometimes the quiet ones need to be heard. The funeral was full, more people than she expected, more lives touched than she'd known. Even the man from the plane stood among them, eyes lowered, learning something too late but learning it all the same. In the days after, the world tried to recognize her. Articles, apologies, invitations. She declined most of them. Recognition had never been the point. But something had changed. On that flight in that aisle, she had been seen not for spectacle, not for praise, but for truth. And that mattered. Because sometimes dignity doesn't raise its voice. It simply stands. And when it does, the world is forced to listen. Why did the silence feel heavier than the insults ever had? The engines had settled into their steady rhythm, but Athalia felt no sense of calm. The aircraft was cruising now, sealed inside clouds that looked soft from a distance and violent up close. She stared straight ahead, hands resting loosely in her lap, fingers relaxed in a way that had taken years to master. Anyone watching might have mistaken it for peace. It was. It was control. Control was what had kept her alive when panic would have gotten her killed. Control was what had allowed her to walk down that aisle without breaking stride, while strangers decided her worth based on fabric and posture. And now, control was the only thing keeping the weight of the moment from crashing down on her chest. She could feel it anyway. The looks had changed. That was the worst part. Before, the glances had been sharp, dismissive, superior. Now they were careful, curious, reverent. People kept finding excuses to look her way, then looking away too quickly, as if caught staring at something sacred or dangerous. She hated that look more than the laughter. Visibility always came with expectations. A flight attendant approached with water, her hands trembling just slightly. "If you need anything at all," she said, voice softer than before, too soft, apologetic. Athalia nodded once. "I'm fine." It wasn't a lie, it was simply incomplete. Across the aisle, the man who had questioned her place sat stiffly now, shoulders drawn inward, his confidence evaporated. He cleared his throat once, then again, as if rehearsing words that refused to come out right. She didn't look at him. She knew what apologies sounded like when they were more about easing guilt than offering understanding. She had heard them before, many times in many forms. Her gaze drifted to the window. The clouds reminded her of dust storms overseas. How the world disappeared into brown chaos. How you learned to trust instruments more than your eyes. How you learned that clarity was often an illusion. Her phone buzzed again. "He asked for you by name this time." Her jaw tightened. She hadn't told anyone on the plane why she was traveling. Not the captain. Not the crew, not the curious passengers who now pretended not to stare. Grief was private. Family was sacred ground. She had spent too many years separating her personal life from her duty to let them bleed together now. Still, the thought gnawed at her. Her father had always been a constant, even when deployments stretched years thin, even when calls were short and infrequent, even when words were replaced by silence that carried more than conversation ever could. He had understood her choices more than anyone. That understanding made this harder. A subtle movement caught her attention. An elderly man a few rows back had turned in his seat. A worn veteran's cap rested low on his brow, hands folded with deliberate calm. Their eyes met for a brief second. He nodded, not dramatically, not loudly. Just enough. She returned it. Some acknowledgments didn't need language. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with renewed attentiveness, but Athalia felt strangely detached from it all. Her mind had slipped backward, uninvited, into memories she usually kept sealed behind mental locks. A desert night, the hum of distant machinery, radios whispering coordinates that didn't exist on any map, the sound of breathing inside her headset, steady, controlled, alive, the weight of responsibility that pressed heavier than her gear ever did. She remembered the first time she realized she would never be normal again. It wasn't during training. Pain was expected there. So was doubt. It was later, after she'd made it through when others hadn't. After the congratulatory silence that followed success in places where applause didn't exist. She'd been sitting alone, cleaning equipment, when the thought struck her with quiet certainty. I can't go back. Not to the person she'd been. Not to the simplicity she'd once known. Service had reshaped her from the inside out, carving edges that never softened again. The plane shifted slightly. Turbulence. A few nervous murmurs rippled through the cabin. Athalia barely noticed. Her body adjusted instinctively, muscles responding before her mind caught up. A young flight attendant paused beside her seat again, hesitating. My brother, she said quietly, almost whispering. He's deployed. Army. I wanted to say thank you. Athalia met her eyes this time, really looked, saw the worry beneath the professional smile, the fear that never left families behind. You don't owe me anything, Athalia said. Just make sure someone's looking out for him when you can't. The attendant nodded, swallowing hard, then moved on. The man across the aisle finally spoke. Commander, he began, voice unsure. She raised a hand slightly. Not abrupt, just firm. You don't need to explain. He nodded, chastened, relieved, embarrassed, perhaps all three. The truth was, she wasn't angry. Anger required energy. What she felt was something quieter, something sadder, a recognition of how easily people sorted others into categories that made sense to them, and how rarely they questioned those instincts. She had built a life in the margins because of that. Halfway through the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time with updates about their arrival. His tone was steady, professional, but she caught something beneath it, a subtle warmth reserved for people who shared a certain unspoken understanding. When the seatbelt sign lit up, the cabin stilled. Passengers adjusted, preparing for descent. Athalia felt the familiar pressure in her chest as the aircraft angled downward. She thought of hospital corridors, of antiseptic smells, of time measured not in minutes but in breaths. She thought of all the times she hadn't come home. The landing was smooth, almost gentle. When the plane slowed and taxied toward the gate, something unusual happened. No one stood immediately. No scramble for overhead bins. No irritated sighs. They waited. It took her a second to understand why. The gesture was small, quiet, respectful. It unsettled her more than the earlier humiliation had. Respect was heavier than contempt. It demanded something in return. She stood when the captain appeared at the door, posture straight, expression solemn. He offered another salute, brief and precise. Good luck, he said quietly, with your father. Her voice caught for just a fraction of a second. Thank you. As she stepped off the aircraft, applause broke out behind her. She didn't turn. She didn't acknowledge it. She walked forward, each step carrying her away from a world that had briefly seen her and back toward one that had shaped her. The hospital was everything the plane was. Muted, sterile, heavy with things left unsaid. Her brother was waiting near the entrance, eyes red, shoulders slumped from exhaustion and relief colliding all at once. He hugged her tightly, longer than usual, as if grounding himself in something solid. You made it, he said again, like it was a miracle. How is he? She asked. He's holding on, he replied. For you, I think. The room was quiet except for machines. Her father looked smaller than memory allowed. The man who had once seemed indestructible now lay pale and fragile, breath shallow but steady. His eyes opened when she stepped closer. Recognition sparked. My girl, he whispered. She took his hand, strong even now, calloused, familiar. I'm here, she said. They didn't need to talk about medals, or missions, or sacrifices. They spoke of small things, of people she'd served with, of moments he remembered from her childhood, of pride expressed not in grand declarations but in quiet certainty. Night deepened outside the window. When he slept, she stayed. When he woke, she was still there. She didn't check her phone, didn't think about the flight anymore. The world had narrowed to the space between his breaths. Near dawn, his grip tightened unexpectedly. Box, he murmured, desk, third drawer. She nodded, I'll find it. Satisfied, he relaxed again. He passed just as the sky began to lighten. She held his hand until the machine stopped, until there was nothing left to monitor, until duty and love finally collided in a silence that couldn't be managed away. Later, alone in his study, she found the box. Inside, a life carefully folded into objects, letters, medals never displayed, photographs faded at the edges, and one envelope addressed to her. She read it slowly, once, then again. The words cut deeper than any wound she'd ever hidden. The world may never know your full story, but I do. She sat there for a long time after finishing, the letter resting in her hands, the weight of everything she had been and everything she had lost settling quietly around her. For the first time in years, Athalia allowed herself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough to breathe again. Why did the recognition come only after the battle was already over? Morning light crept through the hospital blinds in thin, hesitant lines, touching the edge of the bed where her father had lain only hours before. Athalia sat alone now, shoulders straight, hands folded in her lap the way she'd been taught since childhood. The room felt too large without the quiet rhythm of the machines, too empty without the presence that had anchored her entire life. She hadn't slept. She hadn't needed to. Grief, she had learned, didn't arrive like an explosion. It moved in slowly, methodically, the way fog rolled in from the sea, blurring familiar landmarks until even solid ground felt uncertain. Her brother had gone home to shower and change. Nurses came and went with gentle efficiency, their faces carrying practiced sympathy. Athalia acknowledged them all with the same calm nod. Control again, always control. But beneath it, something had cracked. For the first time since she'd stepped into a world that demanded silence and precision, there was no next objective, no extraction window, no timeline that told her what to do when the mission ended. Her entire career had been built around movement forward, onward, through. Now she was still, and stillness was dangerous. She rose and moved to the window. Washington stretched out below, orderly and indifferent. Monuments stood unmoved by individual loss. The city had been built to endure, to project permanence even as generations passed quietly through it. She wondered how many soldiers had stood where she stood now, watching the same skyline after saying goodbye to the people who had shaped them. Her phone vibrated. She almost ignored it. Almost. The screen filled with notifications she hadn't asked for. Messages, missed calls, news links. Someone had posted the photo. Of course they had. The captain's salute. Her standing in the aisle, expression unreadable, jacket still half lifted from the moment she hadn't even known had changed everything. The headline made her jaw tighten. Unsung hero recognized mid-flight. She exhaled slowly. Recognition always came late, after the danger had passed, after the cost had been paid in full, when there was nothing left to risk. She scrolled past it all and locked the screen. A knock came at the door, soft, respectful. When she opened it, she wasn't prepared for what she saw. Uniforms. Not a crowd, not a spectacle, just a line of men and women standing quietly in the corridor. Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines, some active duty, some retired, a few with canes, a few with medals that caught the light when they shifted. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Athalia stepped back, allowing them in. The room filled with a presence she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Shared understanding, shared weight, the kind that existed only between those who had carried it. Captain Vantage stood among them, now out of uniform, his posture still unmistakable. He met her gaze with something like apology, something like gratitude. "We heard," he said simply. She nodded, "Thank you for coming." "We didn't want you to be alone," someone said from the back. The words landed harder than any condolence. They stayed only a few minutes, enough to pay respects, enough to stand watch one last time. When they left, the room felt different, not lighter but steadier. Her brother returned soon after. He stopped short when he saw the folded flag resting on the chair. "It's real," he said quietly. She nodded. They sat together for a while, speaking in fragments, remembering their father as a man, not a rank. A parent who had taught them both discipline and distance, who had loved deeply even when he hadn't always known how to show it. Later that afternoon, the arrangements began. Paperwork, calls, decisions that needed to be made whether she was ready or not. Athalia handled them with the same precision she brought to operations. Tasks created structure. Structure created survival. That evening, she returned to her father's house. It smelled like him. Old books, coffee, the faint metallic hint of naval polish. She moved through the room slowly, cataloging a lifetime of restraint and service. Every object told a story he had never bothered to tell aloud. In his study, she found the box again. This time, she opened everything. Commendations written in restrained language that barely hinted at the risks involved. Photographs from deployments that never made it into public records. Letters from people whose lives he had changed without ever knowing their names. At the bottom, beneath it all, was a second letter. This one wasn't sealed. It was unfinished. The handwriting wavered near the end. "Athalia," it began. "If you're reading this, then I ran out of time. There's something I need you to understand. You and I were cut from the same cloth, but I asked you to carry more than I ever had to. The world changed. The expectations changed. And you walked into that storm without asking for permission." She swallowed. "I know you learned to hide yourself, to shrink when necessary, to let others underestimate you because it kept them comfortable. I did the same once. But there's a cost to being unseen for too long. Even steel fatigues when it's bent the same way again and again." Her chest tightened. "I couldn't protect you from that. I wouldn't have tried if I could. But I want you to know this. You don't owe invisibility to anyone. Service is not the same as erasure." The letter ended there. No signature. No farewell. Just truth. That night, sleep came in fragments, dreams blurred with memories, faces of teammates lost, faces of people saved. The line between the two had always been thin. In the morning, she put on her dress uniform. It felt heavier than she remembered. The funeral at Arlington was precise, reverent, perfect in a way that felt almost unreal. Commands were crisp, movements exact. The flag folded with care so deliberate it bordered on sacred. Athalia stood straight throughout, grief contained behind discipline. She did not cry when the rifle salute cracked through the air. She did not flinch when the bugle played. She accepted the flag with steady hands. Only when she turned away did her breath hitch. The crowd lingered afterward. Old friends, former colleagues, strangers connected by a shared understanding of what had been given and taken. She noticed Captain Vantage again, standing respectfully near the back. And someone else. The businessman from the plane. He approached slowly, uncertainty written into every step. "Commander," he said, voice low, "I wanted to offer my condolences." "Thank you," she replied. He hesitated. "And my apology, not just for the flight, for what I didn't see." She studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "We all miss things," she said, "until we don't." He swallowed, visibly affected. "My son enlisted yesterday." That gave her pause. "He said he wanted a life that meant something," the man continued. I finally understand what that looks like." She didn't respond immediately. Some realizations needed space. A young woman approached next, Navy cadet, nervous, determined. "Commander," she said, "I just wanted to thank you for existing." Athalia almost smiled. As the cemetery emptied, she stood alone among the white stones, the flag tucked carefully under her arm. The world felt quieter here, honest. Recognition had found her eventually. But it wasn't the applause that stayed with her. It was the understanding, slow, hard one, and overdue, that strength didn't need to be loud to be real. And sometimes being seen wasn't about ego. It was about permission. Permission for others to imagine themselves standing where you stood, even when the battle was already over. What happens when the uniform comes off, but the weight stays? The days after Arlington blurred into something shapeless. Athalia stayed in Washington longer than planned, not because there was anything left to organize, but because leaving felt like another kind of abandonment. Her father's house still held his presence in quiet ways, the precise alignment of books, the tools cleaned and returned to their places, the chair by the window where he used to sit in the evenings, staring out as if watching for something only he could see. She moved through those rooms slowly now. Not tactically, not efficiently. Carefully. She sorted papers, answered calls, signed forms that reduced a life of service into neat categories and checkboxes. Each task felt oddly similar to debriefings she'd done after missions, factual, stripped of emotion, focused on outcomes rather than cost. Only this time, there was no compartment large enough to store what she felt. Her phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. She considered letting it go to voicemail. "Commander Desjardins," a woman's voice said when she answered, polished, direct. "This is Grace Holloway, CEO of Atlantic Airways." Athalia closed her eyes briefly. "I wanted to personally apologize," the woman continued, "for what happened on Flight 237. It should never have occurred. We're implementing new training protocols as a direct result." "That won't change how people judge," Athalia replied calmly. "No," Holloway agreed, "but it might change how we respond when they do." Athalia appreciated the honesty. "I don't need compensation," she added, "or recognition." "I know," the CEO said. "That's why I called." After the line went dead, Athalia sat alone at her father's desk, staring at the photograph that had always been there, the two of them in uniform, years apart but somehow the same. She touched the frame lightly, then stood. For the first time in her adult life, she had leave she didn't know how to use. Service had always dictated her time, her movements, her identity. Without it, she felt unmoored, Not lost, she knew exactly who she was, but unanchored, like a vessel between assignments. She met her mother for lunch 2 days later. Elizabeth de Jardas looked older than Athalia remembered. Softer, too. Time had gentled her in ways service never had. Their relationship had always been complicated, shaped by absence, resentment, and love that didn't know how to coexist with either. They spoke cautiously at first, about logistics, about memories of her father that overlapped imperfectly. Then, slowly, the space between them narrowed. "I saw the story," her mother said quietly. "The flight." Athalia nodded. "You never told me," Elizabeth said, "about what you did, what you became." "You never asked," Athalia replied, not unkindly. Elizabeth studied her daughter for a long moment. "I didn't think you wanted to be seen." Athalia considered that. "I didn't think it mattered." They sat in silence after that, not awkward, just honest. That night Athalia walked alone through the city. Cherry blossoms drifted in the air, pale against the dark. She noticed them now. Beauty had always been peripheral to survival, optional. Now it demanded attention. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Captain Vantage. "Hope you're holding up. If you need anything, I'm here." She typed a reply, then erased it, then typed again. "Thank you for seeing me." The response came quickly. "You were never invisible, just operating where most people don't look." She exhaled. The next morning she received another call, this one from Naval Special Warfare Command, an admiral she respected, voice steady and familiar. "When you're ready," he said, "there's a role for you, training, mentorship, shaping the next generation." Athalia listened, without responding immediately. For years she'd been the one moving forward, through doors others couldn't open, into spaces that demanded everything and gave nothing back except purpose. Teaching meant staying, watching others go where she no longer would. "I'll think about it," she said finally. After the call, she sat on the steps outside her father's house and let the sun warm her face. She thought of the cadet at Arlington, the way her eyes had lit up, the hunger there, the same hunger that had once driven Athalia past doubt, past pain, past every voice that told her she didn't belong. Maybe this was the next mission. Not quieter, just different. Later that afternoon, someone knocked on the door. It was the man from the plane, Marcus Langley. He stood awkwardly on the porch, hands clasped, no trace of the arrogance she remembered. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," he said. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" Athalia asked. "For not being who I expected," he replied, "and for making me realize how small my expectations were." She studied him, then stepped aside to let him speak. "My son left for basic training this morning," he continued. "He said he finally feels like he's doing something that matters. I wanted you to know that what you did just by existing changed something." Athalia nodded slowly. "I didn't do it for that." "I know," he said. "That's why it mattered." When he left, Athalia stood in the doorway for a long time. She thought about her father's words. Service is not erasure. For years, she had believed that being unseen was part of the contract. That dignity lived in silence. That recognition diluted purpose. But maybe the truth was more complex. Maybe silence was powerful, until it prevented others from seeing what was possible. That evening, she opened the wooden box one last time. She removed her father's letter and placed it beside her own medals, the ones she rarely wore. She didn't arrange them ceremoniously. She didn't frame them. She simply let them exist together. Before bed, she pulled out her phone and drafted an email she'd been avoiding. "I'm ready to talk about the training role." She didn't send it immediately. She stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one, each representing a life moving forward, unaware of the sacrifices that allowed that normalcy to exist. Then she pressed send. For the first time, Athalia didn't feel like she was stepping back from service. She felt like she was stepping deeper into it. Not as a ghost, but as a guide. And somewhere in that realization, the weight she had carried alone for so long shifted, not lifted, but shared. Sometimes, strength doesn't change the world by force. Sometimes it changes it by staying and letting others see how you stood. What do you do when the fight no longer asks for your body, but still demands your soul? Athalia woke before dawn the way she always had. No alarm, no orders, just the quiet certainty that sleep had given her all it was willing to give. For a moment disorientation crept in. No barracks, no deployment clock, no mission board waiting for her attention. Just silence. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city breathe. Washington at that hour was subdued, almost gentle. A far cry from the places she'd learned to call normal. She sat up slowly, feet touching the floor with deliberate care, as if moving too fast might break the fragile balance she'd begun to build. Today was different. Not because something dramatic was scheduled, but because for the first time she was choosing what came next. At Naval Special Warfare Command, the building looked like any other government structure from the outside, unremarkable, anonymous. Inside, it hummed with purpose. Screens glowed softly. Footsteps echoed with urgency. Young operators moved through hallways carrying the same mixture of confidence and uncertainty she recognized instantly. They saw her. Not with reverence, not with dismissal. With curiosity. That was new. The briefing room was already half full when she entered. Conversations lowered instinctively. A few heads turned. A few whispers followed. She ignored them and took a seat near the wall, posture relaxed but alert. Old habits didn't die. They adapted. The Admiral arrived without ceremony. He didn't introduce her with grand language. He didn't list her commendations or frame her as a symbol. "This is Commander de Jardas," he said simply. "She'll be working with us for the next few weeks." A pause. "Pay attention." That was all. As the session began, Athalia listened more than she spoke. She watched. The subtle tells, who leaned forward when challenged, who avoided eye contact when pressed, who masked fear with bravado. Training was as much about understanding people as it was about tactics. During a break, a young woman hovered near the coffee station. Athletic build, focused eyes, trying not to stare. "Ma'am," she said finally, "I'm Embry Calloway." Athalia recognized the name, the cadet from Arlington. At ease, Athalia replied, "You made it." "Yes, ma'am," Embry said quickly, then corrected herself. "I mean, yes, I did." There was pride there, and fear. The kind that came with stepping into a space where you knew you'd be watched more closely than anyone else. "They say you pushed through Bud S when they told you not to," Embry said. "That you didn't ask for exceptions." Athalia met her gaze. "I asked for standards." Embry nodded slowly, absorbing that. "They don't make it easy." "They're not supposed to," Athalia said. "If it were easy, it wouldn't matter who showed up." Later that afternoon, Athalia stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching a group struggle through a timed evolution. Sweat, strain, frustration, a familiar rhythm. One trainee stumbled. Another hesitated, torn between finishing strong and helping. Athalia stepped forward. "You don't get stronger alone," she said calmly, "and you don't survive by pretending you are." The trainee helped his teammate up. They finished together, slower but whole. Something loosened in her chest. This was different. No extraction, no countdown, no immediate consequences measured in lives lost or saved. But the impact was there, quiet and cumulative. That evening as she left the base, her phone buzzed again. A message from her brother. "Mom says she finally understands you." Athalia paused before replying. "Tell her I'm still learning, too." She drove aimlessly for a while, eventually pulling over near the river. The water moved steadily, unconcerned with rank or reputation. She leaned against the railing, hands in her jacket pockets, watching the current. For years she had believed that strength meant containment. That emotion was a liability. That attachment complicated judgment. But standing there, watching the world continue without her father in it, she realized something else. Avoidance had been its own kind of fear. The next day she was invited to speak, informally, to a small group. No cameras, no press, just operators and candidates in a room that smelled faintly of sweat and anticipation. They asked her about fear. She didn't give them speeches. "I was afraid all the time," she said. "Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying or dangerous. Fear isn't the problem. Letting it decide for you is." They asked her about being underestimated. She smiled faintly. "It's useful. People reveal themselves when they think you're smaller than you are." They asked her about loss. She paused. "You carry it," she said finally. "You don't outrun it, and you don't let it turn you cold. If it does, then whatever took them wins twice." No one spoke after that. That night, alone again, Athalia opened the box one more time. This time she added something new. Her own letter. Not to anyone specific, just words she didn't want to forget. "I believed silence was safety. I believed invisibility was service. I was wrong." She folded the paper and placed it inside. Days passed, then weeks. The headlines faded. The story of the flight became old news, replaced by louder stories, shinier scandals. She welcomed that. Fame had never been her mission. But the ripples remained. A young woman approached her after a session one afternoon. "I almost quit," she admitted. "Then I heard about you. Not the plane, the career. I stayed." Athalia nodded. "Good. Now make sure it's worth staying for." On her last day before returning to regular duty, Captain Vantage sent her another message. "They asked me to speak about the incident at a leadership seminar." Her reply came without hesitation. "Tell them the truth. People don't fail because they don't know better. They fail because they don't look." As she packed to leave Washington, Athalia realized something that surprised her. She wasn't tired. Not in the way she used to be. The weight was still there. It always would be. But it had shifted from a burden she carried alone to a responsibility she could pass on. Before locking the door of her father's house for the last time, she stood in the empty living room and let herself remember him not as a legend, but as a man who had loved her fiercely in the only way he knew how. "I'll take it from here," she said quietly. And for the first time since stepping off that plane, she believed it. Because sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do isn't to fight. It's to stay. And teach others how to stand when the world tries to push them out of the aisle. When the world finally quiets, who are you left standing with? Athalia returned to San Diego without ceremony. No escort, no headlines waiting at the gate, just the familiar scent of salt in the air and a sky that looked impossibly wide after weeks of enclosed rooms and contained grief. She welcomed the anonymity. She needed it. Visibility had served its purpose. Now it was time to breathe again. Her duffel felt lighter than it had on the flight east. Not because it held less, but because she carried it differently now. She drove along the coast that evening, windows down, the sound of waves crashing steady and indifferent. The ocean had always grounded her. It didn't care who you were or what you'd done. It respected only presence, attention, endurance. She parked near the overlook where she used to sit after long deployments, when the noise of the world felt too sharp to enter right away. The bench was still there, weathered, scarred, familiar. She sat. For a long time she did nothing. No mental checklists, no scanning for exits, no replaying conversations for hidden threats, just the wind, the horizon, the quiet understanding that the mission for once was complete. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Embry Calloway. I made it through another evaluation. Hardest one yet. I thought about what you said, about standards. Athalia typed back slowly. Standards don't change, you do. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and leaned back, eyes closed. Images drifted through her mind, not in sharp fragments but in soft focus. Faces of teammates, her father's steady gaze, the look on the young girl's face on the plane when she realized the truth. She thought about the aisle. How narrow it had felt. How exposed. How revealing. That space had held more than humiliation or redemption. It had held a mirror, to others, to herself. She had spent years believing that dignity meant never needing acknowledgement. That strength was proven by how much you could endure without being seen. But standing there, saluted not for spectacle but for truth, she had learned something unexpected. Silence was powerful, but so was presence. The next morning she reported back to her unit. Routine briefings, familiar faces. No one mentioned the flight, they never did. In their world, what mattered was whether you showed up ready, whether you could be counted on. She could, but something in her had shifted. During training, she caught herself pausing to explain things she once would have demonstrated without words. She asked questions she once would have answered herself. It didn't slow her down. It made the team stronger. A junior operator approached her after a session. "Ma'am," he said, hesitant, "I just wanted to say it helps, knowing you didn't always have it easy either." Athalia nodded. "No one does," she replied. "We just get good at hiding it." Weeks turned into months. Life settled into a new rhythm, not easier, just more honest. One afternoon she received a small package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a photograph she recognized instantly, taken from the aircraft aisle, but this one was different. The angle wider, the moment quieter, the captain mid-salute, her standing still, eyes forward, unguarded for half a second. On the back someone had written, "Thank you for showing us what dignity looks like." She placed the photo in the wooden box. Not displayed, just kept. On the anniversary of her father's passing, she returned to Arlington alone. No speeches, no ceremony. She sat on the grass near his marker and told him about her days, about the cadets, about the operators she was helping shape, about how she was learning to let people see her without letting them define her. "I still don't ask for recognition," she said quietly, "but I don't run from it anymore either." The wind stirred the leaves. A distant flag snapped once. She took that as enough of an answer. As she stood to leave, she noticed a young woman nearby, standing uncertainly with a bouquet clutched in her hands. Lost, overwhelmed. "First time?" Athalia asked gently. The woman nodded. "It doesn't get easier," Athalia said, "but you learn how to carry it." The woman looked at her with something like relief. "How?" Athalia thought for a moment. "By remembering that service doesn't end when the uniform comes off," she said, "and dignity doesn't need permission." That night back at her apartment, Athalia stood at the window overlooking the darkened city. Somewhere, planes crossed the sky, their lights blinking steadily as they carried lives forward. She wondered how many quiet stories sat in those seats, how many people carried invisible weight. She hoped some of them would be seen. She hoped some of them wouldn't have to wait as long as she did. Athalia Desjardins had never sought recognition. But when it came, she learned how to hold it without letting it own her. Because strength doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives in a narrow aisle under harsh lights, when someone chooses to stand with dignity instead of demanding space. Sometimes the strongest people don't fight to be noticed. They simply refuse to shrink. And in doing so, they remind the world of something it too easily forgets. That courage doesn't announce itself. It acts quietly and leaves the world better than it found it.